Hey y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about core wounds. I am ready to go deep this month and look at what is really at the root of all of our behaviors, beliefs, and responses. I believe that right now, self-awareness is so imperative, and understanding why we do what we do is going to lead us into a deeper freedom and invite us to come back home to our truest selves. So this month, we're going to be exploring the role our core wounds play in our life and how we can begin to heal them. So what do you say? Let's hop into it.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA Presidential Diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey everybody, it is Mary, and I am excited because today is our second episode in this month's theme of core wounds, and I've brought on my fabulous assistant, Liz, to have a conversation with me today. Hey girl, what's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Man, I'm excited to have, this is kind of like the candid conversation episode of the month. So you know this because you edit all of the episodes, which I'm really grateful for. But it was so funny this morning. I was like, Liz, so I want to recap. Have you listened to last week's episode? And I was like, yes, you do the notes.
Minimum of 3 times.
Oh God. So you know that last week we talked about the foundations of essentially what is a core wound. I talked about the 6 different types of core wounds. We got into what that looks like when you've experienced in childhood some kind of abuse, some kind of abandonment, betrayal, rejection. And then what happens is when we experience any one of those 3 things, so abandonment, betrayal, or rejection, we end up, because of our sweet little childhood brains that are not fully developed yet, we take that on as something is wrong with me in some way. We take it personally. We really interpret that in kind of the context of a shame message. Yeah. And then we spend the rest of our lives, essentially, when we're not in conscious awareness, trying to fill that wound or heal that wound that can come out all kinds of sideways. And we can shape shift, we adjust our personality to be more pleasing, or we go into hyper protection so we don't get hurt again. And when it's left, when that wound is left attended to, it really subconsciously can affect every decision that we make in our life. That, to me, ends up being a fraction of the way that we could live if we had awareness of it and actually could choose our response versus being reactive. So I want to get in with you today, the concept of how this plays into and impacts our relationships. Because it does.
It might be the biggest thing that impacts our relationships.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was thinking this morning, of all the different ways that this wound, my wound of abandonment, the
Which
wound,
is a lot of people's wound.
you know what, if I haven't researched this enough, but I honestly, if I were to try and guess the percentage of people that experience that wound over the other 5, or, it's probably a really, really high percentage. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think it's a high percentage. And I think that, I'm sure we were going to get here, and I'm sure you were going somewhere, and I'm about to derail us.
Go for it.
But I think that and you've talked in the past, I remember you had my therapist, Dominique, came on and talked about attachment styles.
Yeah.
And so I think our core wound is the number one thing that ultimately impacts how our attachment style forms. And so I think that, and again, we'll probably get deeper into this, but anxiously attached people and dismissively avoidant people, both their like number one core wound is I will be abandoned. But it shows up differently for both of those groups of people and how you respond and react to it. So yeah, I think that that's true. And then with the third attachment style being fearful avoidant, they're a mix of both dismissive and anxious. So they also have that core wound.
Yeah. Everybody's got it.
Yeah. For them, it shape shifts more to like, I will be betrayed.
Yes.
So I think that it is probably one of, if not the most common core wound, I will be abandoned.
Well, okay.
But we all respond differently.
Totally. 100%. And it's tricky because like, I think for the average person, if you were to like say, hey, what is your core wound? You may not immediately go to the place of abandonment. And it might show up like the first thing that I see that people can typically identify with are wounds. I'm sorry, our fears. Okay. So like, well, I'm afraid of whatever, public speaking. I'm afraid of being successful. I'm afraid of getting married. I'm afraid of getting divorced. I'm afraid of, I don't know, whatever, however that shows up, fear of heights, fear of whatever. But that is almost like the way that the wound shows itself. Like it's a good first kind of indicator of, ooh, I'm touching on something that's tender. I'm touching on something that is really challenging for me emotionally. But when we keep going down, it's like, okay, so if you were to public speak, what's then the fear? Okay, well, I'm afraid that I'll look stupid in front of people, or I'll mess up, or I'll fall on my face or whatever. Okay. So what if that happens? Yeah. Well, people are going to think that I have no business being up there. People are going to think I'm stupid. People are going to think that I'm not qualified. Okay. Well, what if they think that? What if they have that judgment towards you? Well, then they're going to think I shouldn't, have this job. Maybe I'll get fired. Okay. So what happens if you get fired? Well, and you keep going down and down and down.
Yes.
And that is like the most helpful thing when you're trying to identify your core wound, is asking that question. Okay. So that happens. Then what? Okay. Then what? Okay. Then what? And usually when you get down to it, it's that core wound, oftentimes abandonment. Like if you have a fear of public speaking, chances are you draw the line all the way down, and it's going to show up in that fear of, essentially, if I screw this up and if I'm not as good as I say I am, and if I can't prove that I am enough by public speaking, then I'll be left. I'll be abandoned. I won't be enough.
Yeah.
I mean, it's no joke. So
no, it's no joke.
I mean, but it's like, okay, think about that though. If you didn't have that awareness, then you would spend your entire life potentially never public speaking, because that fear
most of us don't have that awareness. Yes. I think most of us walk through life and this is all subconscious. We have no idea until something happens. I mean, this is language, these are things that I wasn't even aware of until the last few years. And I had gone through like I had done EMDR, and even then like recognized some very specific moments, but didn't have the language of, oh, that's a core wound. But recognizing those things helped me to see how it was impacting other areas of my life. But I think a lot of us it just stays unconscious, and it's never brought into our subconscious, and we're not given the opportunity to make different choices and reprogram those things.
Totally. Well, and I think that's the whole, I feel like, motivation for me to have these conversations is to help collectively like up our level of awareness, because then you can do something about it, I want to go back to attachment styles in a second, but before we do that, I'm curious, for you, what do you feel like your core wound is? Like, having done kind of recent therapy work and stuff, have you been able to kind of trace it back?
Yeah, I think mine is somewhere between I will be abandoned and I will be betrayed.
Yeah.
So I think it probably, It probably leans more to I will be betrayed.
It's interesting because still, and this is why I feel like abandonment is so like the core of the core wounds. Mm-hmm. It's like, if you were to be betrayed,
I will be abandoned.
Exactly. Like I'll be left. Like it always goes back to that.
Yeah. And I think there's obviously, I know you talked about six or eight core wounds last week?
Yeah.
And then there's an extended list. I think it goes to like 22.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of them I think can tie together. So for me, it would be like, I'm going to be betrayed or I'm going to be abandoned because I'm unworthy.
Right.
So they kind of start to come together.
Yeah.
And like mesh with one another. Yeah. And it's kind of how you can turn it back on yourself. So if your core wound forms when you are a child and you don't have the tools to process what is happening. So let's say a parent does something that, impacts you in a certain way that makes you feel unworthy.
Yeah.
And as a kid, you don't have the tools to process, this isn't about me, this is about my parent. And then you internalize it and you make it about yourself. Okay, so my core wound is I will be abandoned. Well, it's my fault because I'm unworthy.
Right. Yeah. It always shifts to that self-blame, doesn't it?
Yeah. Always. Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
So I can talk about myself all day long, but that's really just, it's just too much sometimes, So I really want to like get into how, and I can share some of my stuff too, but how does this show up for you? So like in relationship, so I am unworthy, fearing betrayal, ultimate fear of abandonment. Can you think of a situation like little or small, like let's go into even just friendships or romantic partners or whatever, like how does that show up that you try to manage that when you're unconscious? Hey y'all, real quick, I wanted to invite you to join me on my upcoming live online workshop happening on April 24th called The Magic of Meditation for Anxiety, Burnout, and Stress. I'm so excited about teaching this 3-hour interactive workshop. And if you've ever been curious about meditation, but maybe you felt intimidated by it, or maybe you've been meditating on and off for a little while, but haven't quite found how to make it a consistent practice, this is going to be a powerful workshop for you. We're really going to hone in on using meditation to help alleviate anxiety, stress, and burnout. And we're going to do this in a very interactive way. So there will be journal prompts. I'm going to walk you through several powerful and refreshing guided meditations. There'll even be an intimate Q&A. But my goal for this workshop is really to equip you with these tools of meditation that can leave you feeling confident to access your inner strength, peace, and joy no matter what life throws at you. So to register and find out more about the magic of meditation for anxiety, burnout, and stress, make sure to go over to maryhyatt.com/meditation, maryhyatt.com/meditation to find out all of the details and to register. All right, guys, let's get back to this week's episode.
Yeah, I think that it shows up as really like striving to prove that I am good enough to be in relationship with. And I don't just mean romantic relationships. I mean, anything.
Yeah.
But just really striving, proving like that I'm worth you wanting to be in a relationship with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so heartbreaking. Like I think about all of us, how we walk around in life trying to protect ourselves from hurt, and also trying so desperately to figure out how to earn love from other people.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that came up for the members in my Fully Alive Circle membership, we had our Soul Sister support group this past week. And one of the things that showed up for them, it was like, well, if I'm walking around and I've kind of created this whole personality based out of my wounding, how do I know who is the real me? Like if I take away the parts of me that are like grasping or trying to get love or protecting myself against being hurt again, who is the real me? Like, who is the essential self? Because oftentimes if we look at, like, for example, even our Enneagram number, like, is
100%.
our best attempt to handle that wounding. Like,
100%.
we create that for ourselves. So have you found in your exploration of this, like, parts of yourself that are really, truly you outside of like what you've constructed to manage the wound?
I think what it's looked like for me, I mean, we can just talk about my marriage, I guess. So
cool.
I was married for, like, yes, we can. Like, I was married for 10 years, and have been now divorced for 10 years. And so, what that would have looked like in my marriage was less taking on things that weren't me and more downplaying who I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think that will look like that for everyone, but it was more like, quieting my personality, making myself smaller than I am, even like not listening or watching things that I wanted to listen to or watch because I knew that it wasn't, like being willing to give up parts of myself.
Yeah.
Like fully give them up to dive into what someone else, as opposed to, we both equally, we have these things that we love, we can both do them and it's fine. It was less for me about taking things on and more about what I gave up.
God, I mean, I can so relate to that from my own previous marriage as well. And even honestly now, like, there will be so many times I will be tempted, even in my current relationship, to deny parts of who I am. And we know that we're in denial of who we are, like our true essential self, when it's like, we feel like we're tiptoeing. We feel like we're having to hide parts of ourselves when we want to say something and we choose not to say it. Like a huge fear for me is like saying something that would turn somebody from liking me or accepting me or choosing me. So like part of how my wound shows up, a fear of abandonment, is I have this deep need to be chosen. Like that is like where it comes out for me. And so part of the skill set that I've learned is how to read people so well that I want to make sure that I say what I think they want to hear.
Yeah.
I do what I think they want me to do. Like when I was really unhealthy and unconscious, it would be like, I would dress the way I would think that person would want me to dress.
Been there.
Right? Like all the things that we do to make sure that somebody will not reject us and that they will choose us. And so for me, it was like every time I did that, and this is like stacked year after year after year, and I know you can relate to this. It's like you get to the end and you're like, I don't even know who I am.
I am anymore.
I have completely lost myself.
Yeah.
And it's a process of uncovering once again, like, okay, what is it that I love? Like if this did not affect anyone, what would I choose?
What would I choose? Yeah. Yeah.
I need to practice that a lot, honestly.
It's a lot. And I think too, I think a lot of us are conflict avoiders, not everyone, but a lot of people are conflict avoiders. And I think, I'm definitely don't like conflict, don't want conflict. And for me, that is rooted in don't rock the boat. If you create conflict, then whatever it is, it's just going to be over. Like there is no room for healthy conflict or healthy conversation or healthy discussion or healthy debate. It's just, if there's conflict, it's over.
God. Right. So it's like, you can't have an opinion.
No, you can't have that.
No, you basically can't talk.
You just have to be quiet.
Yeah. But I mean, but like truly though, it's like you can't disagree. Nope. You can't have a vote. Like there's no like discussion. And I know that feeling of that threat of like, if I say anything, it's going to turn into this whole thing. And it's better if I just don't, because if it does, this relationship will end.
It will just be done.
And then I'll immediately be over.
Yeah. And then part of that is and this comes up for me when I'm like dissecting this in my head, why would it end so quickly over small conflict? Well, because you're not worth being with. You're not worth being in relationship with.
Wow. Right.
Yeah.
It's my fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
there's nothing about you that is better and bigger than this small moment of conflict.
Oh, I'm like, thank you for letting me relive some of my own trauma.
Yes.
I'm like, I mean, I can just remember.
We both book therapy sessions as soon as we get on.
Yeah, we're like, Dominique. But seriously though, like, I mean, that it's so real in the moment. And I think that like, if we can just speak to that it feels so huge and that literally what's at stake and what's on the table is abandonment. And this is why I think this is so helpful to understand, because this is why we shapeshift, because the risk is literal psychological death.
Right.
And so I think that can invite in some compassion. And so when we find ourselves in a position where we are feeling that tension of like, can I use my voice? Can I have a boundary? Can I have an opinion? Can I have a preference? Whatever it might be. When that is at play, it's not that like, girl, you need to learn to use your voice. It's like, there's a reason why you're not, and why that fear feels so palpable in your body.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that I have learned, because for me, I mean, and you know this about me because you've known me for a long time, like where I was before getting out of my marriage, and even in the beginning of my relationship with Bentley, it was terrifying for me to use my voice. Like this has been something that I have had to learn and cultivate over time, when there was a risk that was really little, like really small, that could begin to help kind of build my confidence that nothing bad happened when I used my voice right there.
Yeah.
And it was like where the stakes were not high. So it'd be like
that muscle.
Right. Totally. Like, where do you want to go to lunch? Like I could start with that, like having an opinion on that, where it wasn't like huge consequence, you know, if I were to use my voice. And then, this, I mean, I'm talking, this is years of work, and little by little kind of learning that, okay, it is okay for me to have a voice. And ultimately I've had to come to peace with, it's okay if I am left, or if I choose to leave. Like the abandonment doesn't have to be from somebody leaving you. But just that sense of being alone, like I will be okay. And I've had to like go into the dragon's mouth of that fear, because it would just, I mean, a couple years ago, I mean, I was having panic attacks like crazy. When Bentley and I were going through a lot of our challenges a couple years back, and that fear of being alone was paralyzing to me once I started really opening up to it. But I think one of the things that you and I are both have become good at is like sitting in that discomfort until we get through to the other side. And when we realize like, I am safe, I am okay, I'm with me, you know, God's with me, whatever you want, you know, higher powers with me. And like, I can't ever truly be abandoned because I'm always with myself. So how did you get, or maybe you're not fully there yet, but what is your process of learning how to get to that place where you're kind of saying, I can look this core wound in the face, and I'm going to be okay? All right, real quick, I had to share the exciting news that you can now text with me. And yes, it is really me. There's no team. There's no automation. Like I am actually on my phone texting you. And I love this because if you're like me, you're sick of all of the drama and the negativity on social media, or maybe your inbox is completely overwhelmed with emails and you don't even get to read my emails. Well, now we can chat over text. And what I love about this is that I'll be sending you little love notes and reminders to bring in some more ease and gentleness and light and grace and love into your life through weekly affirmations and encouragement. So what do you say? You want to be text friends? Let's do it. Here is my number, y'all. Grab a pen, or of course you can go to maryhyatt.com/text. But here's the number, 615-930-3522, and say hi, let's connect. All right, now back to this week's episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is literally what you're saying is just small moments of, for me, there's been a lot of, in the last few years, a lot of situations, one where I've recognized like, okay, the fear that I'm feeling right now, the emotion that I'm feeling right now is attached to this core wound, and letting myself feel it, sitting in it, and then realizing the consequence is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Like just sitting in the moment and, letting it play out and then going, oh, everything's okay. Like everything, because here's what would happen for me in the past. It's interesting because we're similar.
Yeah.
But then also there's this whole other group of people that have the same core wound of abandonment, but they react very differently. So like if you're talking about, and this is going somewhere, if you're talking about like a dismissive avoidant, for example, they also have a core wound of being abandoned, but they've built positive associations to it. So they become hyper independent. They learn to self-soothe. They don't need anyone to self-soothe. They have, whether they're healthy or unhealthy, things that they go to help them like reconnect to themselves. And so there's like this whole other group of people with the same issue. So for me in the past, what would have happened, because I'm kind of like this blend of like anxious attachment and dismissive avoidant.
Yeah.
I would feel that feeling and then I would run. So I would feel the feeling and then run so that you didn't have the chance to abandon me. I'm making the choice.
Right.
It's me.
Yeah.
So now you never heal that wound when you bolt every time you feel like it's coming. Gosh. You never have the opportunity. So for me now, it's about sitting in that moment, feeling the feeling and letting it play out and realize, oh, like I could have just ruined this really great thing because I ran for the door the minute I felt like abandonment was coming.
Right. And because our brains are wired this way, I think this is like helpful to remember. We are going to have that default neurology to bolt or to smother or to be codependent or whatever, however it shows up. So so let's just agree that is already going to be where our brain goes first. And what I'm learning right now is how to sit in the urge to respond in the way that my wound would respond. And like, I can acknowledge that like everything in me right now wants to do whatever it is. So like for me, that would look like, checking in on Bentley and where are you? What are you doing? When are you going to be home? So for me, it's like that fear. I go to anxious attachment. It could even be like the urge to isolate, the urge to bolt, the urge to hang up, exit the conversation, like not hang in the conflict. And for me to observe, I am feeling this urge right now that is coming from my default neurology. And it is just like that. It is literally a well-worn path. And so I can hang because it's like, this isn't me. This is my old wound neurology. And I like thinking of it like that because it sort of takes away some of the charge. And if I can sit in that and oftentimes like do the opposite of whatever that urge is telling me, whatever the strongest emotion is telling me, it's like, that's when I'm rewiring my brain in that moment.
Yeah. So like our subconscious mind speaks in like emotions and symbols. So you are subconsciously, we'll just use this as an example. So if you are an anxiously attached person, you send a text message to someone and they don't respond. And so there's like this subconscious thing happening where you now are starting to panic. Maybe you're starting to feel emotions. This thing has happened. You're not getting a text back. They hate me. The relationship is over. What did I do wrong? You analyze everything you did over the last 24 hours. Like they're cheating on me. This is happening. All of these things. So, but our conscious mind like speaks in words. So what we have to be able to do is like name this thing that's happening. and say, this is what this is. This is what this fear is. I'm afraid that this is going to happen. And the more times you let yourself do this, the more you realize it isn't real.
Right. Right.
It's not, and I'm not saying that would never happen, because of course it could, but it's not real usually.
It's so true. And God, I mean, talk about a powerful exercise. Like if everybody did this, because I see this in my girlfriends all the time, especially my single girlfriends, it's like they'll text a guy. He doesn't text back immediately. And
he hates you.
I mean, totally. I'm fat. Now I'm ugly. Now I'm undesirable. Now I'm not sexy.
And also now I want to text him again. Now I need to text him again because I have to fix it. What did I like?
Yes. Oh my gosh.
But
that would be like an experiment.
Yeah. If you just sat in it, dude texts you the next day. I'm so sorry. Like, my workday was insane yesterday. I didn't even get a chance to look at my text messages until 11 o'clock that night. It felt too late. I didn't want to hit you. Oh, this was not about me at all.
Totally.
Like, this wasn't about me at all.
That is literally like, if everyone could think about the last text where they got really anxious and just noticing again, without judgment. Cause I think what we need in this situation is so much compassion and grace for ourselves, because in that moment, we're not in our right mind. Like
we're really not.
We're really in that wounding.
You are going back to whenever that thing happened to you when you were 4.
Right. Yeah. Your 4-year-old is the operating system at that moment.
Right. And if you have a 4-year-old, that's not why.
And I'm always like, our brain's unattended. It's like a 2-year-old with a machete. Like it just all over the place, It's like, you don't want that person in charge. However, oftentimes that is the person that is in charge of our brains. And so it's like recognizing like, oh, right. And this is where it is like coming above ourselves. And this is why I love like mindfulness work, is because it gives you the opportunity to notice your default reaction, to create a pause before you respond.
Totally.
I'm curious well, 2 questions. How this shows up with your relationship to your kids, because I know that there are so many moms. One of the moms on the circle support group this past week, she said, okay, how do I not screw up my kids? Cause she's seeing all this play out and she's like, I don't want my kids to have to handle this core wound. And basically like, how do I not give my own children a core wound because of my own whatever, neglect or just unconsciousness. So how has this played out with your kids? I know your kids are older, but like kind of talk to that a little bit.
Well, I am grateful because even though I wasn't aware of a lot of these things, I was a super young mom. I had my daughter when I was 21. Yeah. And so I had never been to therapy. I thought that I was like pretty okay. Yeah.
You went to church, idea. So
I went to church, so I was fine. And but I was really aware. I was not yet aware of how it had impacted me, but I was aware of the fact that I had grown up in a really dysfunctional situation. And so I'm grateful for that, because there was a lot of parenting from a conscious parenting from a place of awareness of not wanting to repeat certain things. Now, in some of the worst ways, I did repeat some of those things. I mean, some of those things were 100% repeated. And my kids know that therapy is always on the table for them because of that, for the rest of their lives. So one, you're probably going to mess your kids up. Totally. You're going to, because you're human. But a sorry to your kids goes a long way. So when you begin to unpack all of this stuff, and you can see I've had this core wound and somehow I've transferred it onto my kids, or the patterns that created my core wounds, I just parented like that because that's how I was parented. Yeah. It's never too late to change those things. And it's also, I apologize to my kids all the time. I think that there's a lot of power. Even if you have a 15-year-old and you've been parenting a certain way for 15 years, and so at some point in this month, you realize, I'm parenting the same way that I caused wounding, whether that was having, unrealistic expectations or being detached in certain ways or not allowing your kids to feel their feelings and emotions, whatever it is. It's never too late to go to your kids and say, I've just realized this and I'm so sorry. Yeah. And I want to do better. Feel free to call me out on it. Like my kids have no problem being like, you just did this thing.
Yeah. You're like, oh, thanks.
But that's because I've worked really hard to create an environment where they know, like, there's no punishment for me if you are the closest people to me. You're the only people that I live with. There's nobody better to call you out. So like, there's no punishment. If I'm behaving in a certain way, you have full freedom here to say, that's not healthy. Or,
well, and like, think about,
you said you don't want to do that anymore.
I mean, to me, I just want to like acknowledge you, because if you think about what you were sharing about earlier, the issue that you dealt with fearing conflict, like there's no space for conflict, the fact that you have now created space for conflict or for disagreement or for being like held accountable and responsible for your reactions, that's pretty major. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is, and this is, one of the things that's come up in therapy for me is that in a strange way, my most secure relationships is with my children. Now, that's a little bit bizarre because it's not their job to create a safe, secure, space for me. But because I do have a sense of security with them, I don't fear conflict with them.
Yeah.
Which allowed me to create space where they don't fear conflict with me. Yeah. So they know, like, we can have conflict with her and she's going to love us the same. Or we can call her out on something and she will hear it. And if she doesn't hear it right away, she'll apologize really quickly when she realizes that we were right. Well, when she realizes we were right.
And I love that idea, because I think that probably, at least for most people, there's probably a relationship that you've got with someone else that is healthy and that isn't coming from a place of wounding. Like it may not be your romantic relationship. It's probably not your relationship with your parents. It could honestly even be like a relationship with your therapist, but there's probably some kind of relationship in your life that is, mimicking what a healthy relationship could look like, where there's not fear of abandonment. Maybe it's less charged, there's less risk. Like, for example, like my relationship with a girlfriend, for example, is a lot more secure than a romantic relationship for me, just because that's kind of where my wounding is, or is a lot more secure than a relationship with my dad or my mom or my sisters. And so for me, what I love what you're sharing is that you can take almost an example of like, okay, here's where I do feel safe. And here's what I do when I feel safe. I communicate differently. I respond differently. I'm not as fearful. I'm not as anxious. I'm not as avoidant, whatever that looks like. And can I take that as sort of the example and transpose that into my other relationships? Like, baby step by baby step, but it's like, it's almost like you can practice over here where it's secure and then begin to expand and kind of challenge yourself to carry that over into the romantic relationship. Or it's like, I know my coaching clients, for example, like I hope and I feel like I'm a definite safe space for them to where like, I get to receive a lot of the things that they can't share to the other people in their lives, but just by sharing it with me and hearing themselves share it out loud, for me to not respond in any negative way and just hold space, then we can talk about what it might look like to say that to the person that they need to say it to, but you get to practice it first in a safe space. I think that's important.
Yeah, it is nice to have that. And I think, for me, if I think about it, I'm not afraid. Again, we talked about this in the beginning. I'm not afraid of conflict. I'm afraid of the consequence of conflict. In reality, I would love to be able to have conflict with people and know that like, we're just fine afterwards. Like,
totally. What a concept.
We disagreed and then we're just cool with each other. Like, it's just fine. Like, and of course we're not talking about like ginormous. There's absolutely times that conflict is going to cause, a relationship to end. And that was what was necessary.
Yeah.
But for me, even the smallest conflict is terrifying. because it means that it's going to be over. And so it is nice to be able to like practice that and to feel like, oh, we can have conflict and then we're just like, okay, the next day, like it's just, we're just fine. Yeah.
Well, and this just makes me think of part of this work is coming back to an integrity with self. Like, what I mean by that is learning how to be okay and staying in congruent, staying in alignment with who we truly are. And like that integrity of like, I am who I say I am.
Yeah.
I hold on to my sense of worth, my value system, what's important to me, what I believe in, that I champion that and stay in integrity with myself above all else, above like needing approval, finding love, needing to be chosen. Now, again, there's going to be that moment of, I've got to hang in the discomfort because I want to get quiet here. I don't want to like stand up for this thing that I believe in or whatever it might be. But my sense of being authentic and true to myself is my number one value. Like that's something that I have learned. Like at the end of the day, my most important relationship is me.
Yeah. And then the truth is that you won't ever experience authentic relationship or unconditional love or any of that unless you're doing that.
Yeah.
Because why you're being loved or why people are choosing to be in relationship with you is based on someone that you're not.
Right. Totally. Like blocks intimacy on every level when you can't show up in that way. And I think this is important to remember is that this just kind of came to me that like we truly can never be abandoned unless we abandon ourselves.
Yeah.
Now, the caveat is like we can be left and that can hurt. Like part of life is grief, the grieving process. Like it's not to say that, you know, we're never going to feel pain. We're never going to experience hard things or hurt. But that idea of like the true abandonment that we're truly afraid of is not even possible unless we are abandoning ourselves. And I think that if we like flip that on its head and look at, okay, where am I abandoning myself? Like that's the real wound now that I'm like a conscious adult and this person might leave. This person could betray me. This person could reject me, this person, but like the only abandonment is if I turn that onto myself, if I like go and take in that shame element and start that whole conversation and story around how I'm not worthy and I'm not enough and all of that. If I keep replaying that, that's the abandonment of self. When I leave who I truly am, my inherent worthiness, like my lovability. So I think that's kind of comforting to be like, the idea of abandonment in and of itself is an illusion as an adult. Like it only is to the degree that I'm leaving myself. And this is also where I'd say like, kudos if you have a higher power, because this is really helpful in times like this to be like, I won't be left by my higher power, whatever that is, even if that is like, I, you know, am one with the universe, like forget God or whatever, like that there is something above you that will never leave you, that's steady and set.
The entire universe.
Yeah. By something we mean the whole cosmos out there. Yeah.
Forget your parents. The whole universe is behind you.
Yeah, totally. But I think that like, I don't know. I just think that that's kind of profound to think about.
Yeah.
But we have to remind ourselves of that often. And I think the other illusion that we need to remember is that this wounding, the trigger isn't going to go away.
No, it never goes away.
Yeah.
I think that's really important because I think it's interesting because, you know, especially if you're in a place where you are desiring healing, I think what can happen is that you start this path, you recognize your core wounds, you start working on it, you still feel it sometimes.
Yeah.
And it can become very frustrating and very shameful, even when you're like, why am I still dealing with this thing?
Yes.
Why is this still coming up for me? I'm 10 years out. I've paid thousands of dollars in therapy.
Right.
I've read all of these books. I've watched all of these YouTube channels. I'm doing all of this work all of the time.
Yeah.
And I'm not healed. And I think in reality, the goal isn't this like perfect healing. It's gone.
Right.
The goal is just the awareness and the consciousness of it and learning how to respond and react differently. That's it.
That's it. And I wish like everybody got this, because it's like, to me, it's moving forward in courage in spite of our triggers, in spite of our wounding. 100%. It's not eliminating them altogether. It's like, oh no, I have the tools now that I can pick up the tool. Like, so real quick, for example, for those that have been following my recent trauma of the tornado, real quick, I was stuck in my car in a tornado several weeks ago, like 3 weeks ago, here in Nashville, which was utterly terrifying. I was by myself. I didn't know, it came out of nowhere. It was raining. But I didn't know there was going to be this tornado, and totally took out like just everywhere around me, all these trees, uprooted them. We've got damage to our house, damage to my car. It was a whole thing. And that was truly traumatic. And so I just did a brain spotting session, literally this week, where I got to relive all of that beautiful trauma, which is just so lovely. But it was so powerful to experience how to handle that in real time. It was like, okay, I know, because I had a panic attack last week. I've been having a really like challenging time with like a surge of anxiety. It's opened up a lot of other trauma that I've had stored in my brain. And I'm like, okay, what tool do I need to handle this and to like bring the salve and the balm to the wound? And it was so fascinating because I was in the brain spotting, and my therapist was like, okay, well, what was it that you were so afraid of? You know, because I said, it wasn't like I was afraid of even death. It wasn't that I was even afraid of like the storm. Like, it's not like I'm afraid of tornadoes or afraid of rain or thunder or any of that. And what I realized is that I had this fear that it started with, I didn't know. Like, I didn't know this was going to happen. So there was this fear of being blindsided. And that is like a real common theme for me in my life, of like thinking everything's fine and then it's not all of a sudden, and being blindsided, which means I'm stupid and I didn't see it coming. Yeah. And because of that, I will be left and I'll be abandoned. So it wasn't even that like it was the storm that was so traumatic. It was that it was hitting on this core wound of the abandonment piece. Like, if I don't know enough, if I'm stupid, if I didn't see it coming, like I kept saying as I was reliving this, I didn't know, you know? Yeah. And that was the panic. I didn't know. Mm-hmm. And trail that back to, peel back the layers to, oh my God, like it's the abandonment. So it's not that I'll never experience trauma again in my life. It's not that I won't ever have that trigger of being blindsided. Right. It is the fact that I now can access the tools I need to address it in real time, rather than burying it and stuffing it and avoiding it, or, doing all the things I would have normally done previously without this awareness. It was like, oh my gosh, I have the awareness and now I can do something about it. And I think that's the whole point of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Any last words of wisdom from your core wound journey, your therapy journey?
I think that that's a great way to wrap it up, is to like shift the focus away from healing where something goes away to healing just where you're mindful of it and you learn how to respond and react differently. Yeah. Like, because it will be disappointing if you're waiting for it to just be gone.
Yeah. Sorry.
This is how it works.
I know. I remember that was really like a whole thing for me when I kind of recognized that, of being like, oh, I'm like in this for the rest of my life. Like there's a grief in that, but it's also comforting. And like, I don't have to be looking for the magic bullet to like fix this and make it go away, but I can get better 100%. At how I respond, and I can change my response. Like, I don't have to stay anxious, attached, and codependent for the rest of my life. Like, there's another way. And that feels really hopeful. Is like, even though it takes work, I get to learn a new way that is going to cause less pain and fear and anxiety and panic in my life. Yeah. I will do that. And it's the hard work, but I'll take it. Totally. Yeah. Totally.
That's good. Yeah.
Ooh, girl. Thank you for your vulnerability. And
You're welcome. I'm just like on your driveway talking.
I know. Guys, if you ever want to know what Liz and I do at 7 a.m. in the morning, this is it. We cover like pretty much like, so Liz comes over several times early in the morning. She's a morning person, and she'll bring me coffee or whatever, pick up this or that. And we will literally be outside and talk about, attachment therapy, attachment wounds, therapy wounds, trauma, addiction.
This is all before 7:30 a.m.
Pretty much. So you got a little coffee time with Mary and Liz today.
That's right.
Thank you, girl. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, guys, we have one more episode next week with Jake Kaufman. I'm really excited to bring him on the show as our guest expert this month. So make sure, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the podcast. Of course, share this episode on your social media. Screenshot it, put it in your story, tag me, let us know what you got out of today's episode. It's always just nice to get a little feedback and hear what's hitting home for you guys. And
go apologize to your kids.
And go apologize to your kids. Go hire your therapist, please. Something. That's so good. You know what? That's it. We're done. Just do that and we're good. Y'all, seriously, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some amazing nuggets to take home and start implementing into your life. And if you're looking for the show notes and links, head on over to maryhyatt.com/show. And if you loved it, why not bring your girlfriends along this journey of becoming fully alive with you? Just give a quick share of this episode to your social channels and enjoy those debriefing convos with your besties. Thanks again, and I can't wait to connect with you next week.